There's a line that separates the comfortable from the sovereign, and it is not drawn by accountants. It is patrolled. The threshold does not sit in a brokerage account or a cap table. It stands where power buys certainty, where money pays to bend risk into submission. You are not rich until you have your own private army. That is the threshold. Cross it, and the air changes. The world you inhabit is no longer governed by the same kind of ifs and maybes. It is governed by gates, radios, and rules of engagement. Max Weber called the state the whole of the monopoly on legitimate violence. He wrote, in the early years of the 20th century, that this monopoly is the very definition of a modern state. Yet, history answers back that monopolies are only secure until capital discovers an angle. When profit meets force, private power sharpens a blade and calls it security. The East India Company did not just trade cloth and tea, it fielded battalions that could break kingdoms. William Dalrymple, in A History Fit for the Sleepless, describes a chartered company that built an army larger than many European states and hired sepoys by the tens of thousands, a corporate military that conquered Bengal and installed a revenue machine in the name of commerce. If a balance sheet could wear a saber, it would have looked like that. The lesson did not end with empire. In the 19th century, when steel foundries burned like artificial suns along the rivers of Pennsylvania, Henry Clay Frick recruited the Pinkerton Detective Agency to break a strike at Homestead. Barges arrived by night. The rifles were not metaphors. Working men bled into the Monongahela, and the message was written in a language everyone could understand. A corporation had rented an army. In Detroit, decades later, Henry Ford built a service department under Harry Bennett that ran like a private intelligence bureau, a clenched fist wrapped in a cardigan, strong enough to crack skulls outside the River Rouge plant. Journalists gave it a name that sounded polite, workers called it something else. Finance has always preferred euphemism, private security, risk mitigation, asset protection, but a man carrying a baton is still a man carrying a baton. A convoy of armored trucks is still a choreography of force. When the 20th century turned toward oil, the new kingdoms were concessions and offshore rigs. Look at the Niger Delta and the way multinationals operated in a swamp thick with grievances. Court filings, in cases like Kiobel, traced lines between corporate policy, state violence, and the ghost wages of oil. No share price chart could fully capture the cost of security on a barrel of crude, yet every earnings call carried the quiet of helicopters beating the air above compounds surrounded by wars. Psychology offers a lantern for this fog. Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky described loss aversion, the way pain from a loss outweighs the joy from an equivalent gain. Once wealth grows talons, its owner becomes afraid not of poverty, but of the smallest scratch. A private army is loss aversion made steel. It purchases a feeling that the worst will be kept at bay. The science of fear becomes a line item in general and administrative expenses, and the number looks small when compared to the terror that stalks in the mind of a person who believes they have something priceless to lose. Then came the new century and the privatization of war itself. Blackwater, founded by Eric Prince, became a synonym whispered in congressional hearings. Iraq was a theater of contracts. In Baghdad's traffic circle, named for two rivers that joined before the Tigris met the sea, Gunfire once wrote a paragraph no public relations firm could edit away. The company rebranded, then rebranded again, because names are mortal but contracts live longer. DynCorp, Triple Canopy, and a constellation of similar firms turned conflict into a procurement exercise. An industry arose around the logistics of power, convoys, forward operating bases, personal security details for diplomats and oilmen, training cadres for foreign police. The Montreux Document, a creation of lawyers and diplomats in the late 2000s, tried to delineate responsibilities for private military and security companies. It was a map sketched in pencil on a stormy night, yet it acknowledged something essential. The monopoly had cracked, the state no longer held all the keys. Russia's answer was Wagner, a private army wrapped in plausible deniability. The name sounded like an opera, but the performance ran on cash, contracts, and cargo planes. In Africa, there were reports of mining concessions traded for protection, of governments buying survival with ore, of propaganda and training sold alongside bullets. The business model was an old one, with a modern accent. Executive Outcomes had tried a corporate version of the same dance in West and Southern Africa in the 1990s, retaking diamond towns, halting rebel advances, and issuing invoices that governments paid in wire transfers or promises against future mineral rights. The historian of capital would read these episodes not as outliers, but as milestones on a road built by money's need to make the uncertain safe. What does any of this have to do with investing? Everything. A moat is a metaphor investors adore. Warren Buffett used it to describe durable advantage, but a moat is a defensive weapon, not a growth strategy. Some fortunes erect literal moats, walls of contractual force around revenue streams. Telecommunications licenses, shielded by regulators, can be as effective as a ring of hired rifles. Control of a port, a pipeline, a strategically located warehouse network that makes competitors' math go pale, these are forms of private power. When the legal system is fragile, the math shifts again. Companies buy certainty with security. and the return on capital is written in the language of quiet roads and obedient permits. Charles Tilly, the sociologist, argued that states are fundamentally protection rackets, and that war made the state while the state made war. The investor's version is simpler. Who sells the protection? Who collects the rent? In stable jurisdictions, courts and police provide the certainty that allows thin margins to survive. In broken jurisdictions, certainty becomes a boutique product. It is offered by men with lanyards and radios outside a headquarters in a capital where the lights flicker. The cost shows up in the notes to the financials in a phrase like security expenditures or risk mitigation. Each year, the number grows a little. The executive's voice grows a little smoother when asked why. Public filings in the United States have begun to reveal what private security costs at the top of the pyramid. Proxy statements describe tens of millions of dollars devoted to the protection of a single chief executive. Helicopters, residential measures, secure transport, hardened offices, travel teams, the quiet hiring of former special operations personnel whose resumes read like classified cables. Investors think of research and development as a marker of ambition, but there is a different metric worth tracking. When security spend begins to rival innovation spend, it is a tell. The company has crossed a line where fear, not opportunity, dictates the capital allocation meeting. There is a taboo most financiers pretend not to notice. Some families do not buy insurance, they buy a perimeter. Family offices with bland names in cities where glass towers hum at night quietly draft security doctrines. Trustees discuss evacuation plans in the same tone as tax strategies. The richest people in Silicon Valley buy ranches with airstrips and diesel buried under orchards. They do not call their guards a private army, because the word tastes like rust. But when a plane leaves at midnight, with a small unit trained to keep harm at a respectful distance, call it what you like. The threshold has been crossed. History, ever patient, keeps its ledger. In Renaissance Italy, condottieri rented their swords to city-states and often swapped sides when the coin improved. Niccolò Machiavelli, who knew the flavor of defeat, warned that mercenaries are disloyal by design, because their loyalty is to pay, not to polity. Investors would do well to remember this. Security bought as a supplement can become a dependency, and dependencies are futures with the wrong party writing the options. If your revenue needs guards to collect, your claim on cash flows is as good as the man at the gate and the politics that feed them. Political risk in the textbooks sits like a cloud icon over foreign projects. In life, it clenches a fist. The International Monetary Fund will publish a paper about sovereign risk in extractive industries, and the resource curse hypothesis will be cited with proper academic manners. Jeffrey Sachs and Andrew Warner will be footnoted. But on the ground, the generator sputters. A wage arrears rumor becomes a spark, and a mine gets shut by a handful of angry men who believe, perhaps correctly, that history has not paid them what it owes. The company that thought it owned the ore then discovers that it owns a riot instead. Insurance firms sell kidnap and ransom coverage, and reinsurers price it with actuarial coldness. The investor who reads the risk factor pages in annual reports will see it written plainly: civil unrest could materially and adversely affect operations. The deeper psychology lives in boardrooms. Power distance, a concept from organizational psychology, measures how comfortable people are with unequal power. In high power distance cultures, subordinates do not challenge. A security apparatus thrives in such soil. Authority bias, the habit of trusting those who look like they command, shapes decisions as surely as credit committees. When a private security chief explains that a budget must be doubled to ensure the safety of the leadership and the continuity of operations, very few directors wish to be the one who votes no. Fear is a fine salesperson. It always makes its number. Investors love clean stories, moats, flywheels, network effects. But the oldest story is the fortress. In medieval ledgers, the value of the harvest and the thickness of the walls were the same conversation. In modern balance sheets, the fortress is contracts, concessions, and a purchase capacity to keep those contracts alive. Sometimes it wears boots, sometimes it wears a legal doctrine. The Anti-Pinkerton Act in the United States, passed in the 19th century after the agency's adventures and labor wars, theoretically restricts federal contracting with firms functioning as mercenaries. It sits there like a historical hiccup, proof that the line between public and private force has never been clean. Consider the contemporary grocery list of power. A technology company builds a campus with gates that could hold back a small battalion. A mining company in Highland Valley trains a rapid response unit in coordination with local police. A shipping conglomerate hires maritime security for routes along the Horn of Africa, where pirates once wrote ransom notes with satellite phones. An energy company signs an agreement with a host nation that all but deputizes its guards as auxiliary peacekeepers. Each line item speaks the same language. Certainty is being purchased, in case law and in Kevlar. The old money families learned this grammar centuries ago. They invested in land not because it rose the fastest, but because it made a siege expensive. Estates were productive fortresses. Timber, grain, and tenants were a revenue engine, and walls were the dividend protection program. Today's version is not a crenellated tower. It is an influence map. It is a stable of lobbyists who can stop an unhelpful clause in a bill before it sees daylight. It is a private cyber unit that watches for intrusions, not by teenagers, but by competitors. It is a crisis communications team that can bend the public narrative when the facts come out all at once and refuse to be rearranged. For those who study numbers, there's a method in the madness. Wealth that requires constant defense is a position with negative convexity. Small shocks extract large responses. The requirement of a private army is the admission that the cash flows are set inside a hostile environment. High return on capital can be the child of high risk dampened by force, but force is a cost. It compounds in a different direction. The patience of capital and the patience of armed men are not the same animal. One lives in quarters and years, the other lives in minutes and morale. And yet, the threshold has a seduction. In a world where courts are slow and narratives are faster than truth, a private army feels like a rational purchase. When a billionaire buys an island and staffs it with a security detail that could repel a platoon, it sounds like excess until an event reminds the rest that trailheads are not safe when envy is mobile. The island is an allegory. Whether the island is literal, like a Hawaiian paradise owned almost entire by a single man, or figurative, like a business unit walled off from market forces by regulation and muscle, the strategy is to buy peace by renting force. There is a counter lesson, as old as Athens. Mercenaries defend only what you can pay for, and loyalty paid by the hour has an expiration date. The strongest fortress in finance is still legitimacy. When customers believe you deserve your profits, they protect your right to make them without knowing that is what they are doing. When communities believe a mine has given them a future, they will crowd out insurgents who promise easy rage. When regulators believe you are on the right side of history, they will interpret the same ambiguity in your favor. Trust remains the cheapest private army on earth. It is slow to build and fast to squander, and most balance sheets do not bother to measure it. So where is the threshold for an investor who will never hire a guard? It is the moment a portfolio begins to understand how much of a company's power depends on force, literal or legal. It is in the discipline of reading the back half of filings with the same appetite as the growth slides. It is in the habit of asking whether a moat is law or loyalty, contract or culture, security team or product love. One kind of moat hardens the soul and softens the cash flows. The other kind compounds quietly without needing watchtowers. You are not rich until you have your own private army. But perhaps that is not the boast it sounds like. Perhaps it is diagnosis. It says the wealth in question is made in a place where normal guarantees do not hold. It says the yield is married to a promise of force. It says the castle is magnificent, and the countryside hates it. The true apex, the kind of wealth that sleeps without radios crackling in the dark, owns a different threshold. It is protected by courts that work, by customers who would miss you if you were gone, by employees who would defend you without being asked, and by communities who believe your success tastes a little like theirs. The historian of finance, a patient creature with an ear for whispers, would close the book here and listen to the echoes. A chartered company with its regiments in Hindustan. A steel baron sending barges upriver at midnight, a convoy turning a Baghdad afternoon into a case study in consequences. A Kremlin-adjacent venture trading passports for mines. A valley where a mine fence gleams under a hard sun, and the market calls declare enterprise value. The threshold is real. It is older than most countries, and younger than each newborn fear. Cross it if you must. Count the cost with clear eyes. In the end, a private army is not an emblem of triumph. It is a confession. It confesses that the world will not give you certainty at any price acceptable to you, so you will buy it wholesale and post it at your gates. It confesses that the rule of law is a dividend stream you do not trust. It confesses that your wealth lives in a place where power must wear boots. Some fortunes require that, many do not. The investor who can tell the difference will keep more of what they make and sleep through more nights. There are many ways to be rich. Only one of them needs a rifle at the door.